Okay, welcome to the Reclaiming Soul Work podcast, where we are reclaiming the sacred in soul work for healers, counselors, practitioners, and social workers, one episode at a time. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sequoia. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm really happy to be here with you all. Let me turn down this bright light in my eyeballs just for a moment. We'd like to welcome you to episode 11 about unlearning burnout. We are here to unlearn the lie that we've been taught that we can prevent burnout when that's just simply not true. Let's make space today for the ways that we can unlearn these ways of burnout so that we can better take care of ourselves and just be grounded, in the reality of our situations, especially if you are someone who is listening that identifies, you know, within the QT BIPOC community. Again, just related to our realities about our working environments and being in a capitalistic society.
Yes, 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 yes. Welcome, y'all. Welcome. My name is Biani, she, ella, they pronouns, and welcome to Reclaiming Soul Work, a heart centered podcast by two queer Black femme healers and spiritual social workers who explore the intersection of magic, spirituality, identity, and ancestral connections through the lens of tarot, divination, mysticism, mental health, and everything in between. And like I said, my name is Biani. I'll give you a little bit of intro. I was born in the 80s, a proud Zennial. I'm a Black Latinx queer non-binary femme healer. My people come from the island known as Taino Macorix, which is presently called Dominican Republic. We hail from the land of plátanos, bachata, merengue, salsa, y palo. I was born and raised on Munsee Lenape territory, which makes me a proud Bronxite and a hip-hop feminist head. I come from a long line of brujas, fierce mamas, and Queen of Swords matriarchs. I'm a word and energy witch, somatic brujex, tarot nerd, and I live in Lenape, Hoking, Lenni Lenape territory. Right now, honestly, because of the lunar eclipse, I'm making a lot of room for honoring my ancestors, specifically these two fierce and courageous matriarchs in my life. And I just want to say their names today, Isabel and Altagracia. And I was born around the full moon. I don't know if I've ever said that, but it feels important because we are getting ready for this blood moon, full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus. And so I'm super energized right now. And I think evening is where I shine the brightest, y'all. And yeah, I'm here with you. Welcome, friends. That's my intro.
I love that. I love that. Come on, intro. I,
I'm
I
trying. I'm
see we,
trying.
I know. I see we put a little oomph in it today. I
I'm
like
just
it.
like, I'm trying to, I'm always stumbling. Let me just be like, let me write it down.
I love that. I love that, and I appreciate it. As I mentioned, my name is Sequoia, and I use she and her pronouns. And I go back and forth between Anchorage, Alaska, and then the Inner Land in Chicago, where I'm originally from. Um, my family is from Alabama, so I want to give, acknowledgement to that land as well. And yeah, really glad to be here with everyone. You all know that, I'm a business owner, I'm an auntie, I'm a caregiver, um, also identify as queer. And so, yeah, today I just want to highlight one of the books that I'm reading that I'm going to actually read a little selection from that aligns with, working in social service, community activist kind of spaces related to burnout. But one of my favorite books, Sustaining Spirit, Self-Care for Social Justice by Naomi Ortiz. And so that's what I'm currently reading. And the eclipse energy has been, really interesting. But I think for me, um, what energy I'm still kind of feeling is actually that quarter moon.
Mm,
Um, I feel like I'm still kind of swimming in that a little bit.
mm,
Um, So we'll see what happens with this eclipse. But other than that, glad to be here to talk about a real topic.
Oh, also, this is the last like lunar eclipse for a couple years now. The next one won't
Yeah,
be. So, for those who are tuning in, like, make the most of this energy, like just be kind to yourself. And yeah, like Sequoia was saying, like, pay attention, tune in.
cool, cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's hop right into things. Um, I just want to, you know, kind of highlight that I know we kind of started this off with we've been taught a lot, about burnout. And just want to ground in like what that means. And just open us up to this conversation, many of us either work in social service, higher education, and absolutely other kind of sectors. But we all get this kind of language and perspective that burnout is preventable. And, in a capitalistic society, again, just want to highlight how difficult that can be, just related to um, the structure of the organization, corporation setting that you're in, the job title that you might have. We talked about quiet quitting a few episodes ago, and we're going to bring that up a little bit later, but how many of our kind of work environments are already set up for us to, occupy or be in like 3 or 4 different jobs. And so that's what we mean by um, that burnout is avoidable, and thinking about it in that way is a lie. Because if you, again, work in a setting where you already know coming in that you have like 3 or 4 jobs, burnout is inevitable. Um, and so, yeah, let's unlearn the lie that we can prevent burnout by merely focusing on self care strategies or other individual interventions and approaches offered to a systemic and collective issue. I appreciate that, Biani. Is there anything else that you kind of want to say about that part of it?
Yeah. Thanks for framing it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, y'all, like we remember, for some of us who remember grad school or remember our training, so much of the discussion around burnout has been centered on prevention, and this idea that we can just prevent burnout by doing these 3, 5 things we can do ourselves as individuals to really, prevent burnout in our lives. And we want to gently interrupt that narrative because it's not true. And also adding what it's been like living in a pandemic, doing this work in a pandemic, burnout is unavoidable now. We can't talk about prevention anymore. We have to sit with the reality that it's going to happen. It's going to happen again, and we can't really avoid it. And so, um, yeah, let's really unlearn that lie. We cannot prevent burnout. You cannot prevent burnout. The system is sustained by burnout. So one person alone can't self-care their way out of burnout.
Cool. Are we, do we want to do the disclaimer part? Are we ready to just hop right in?
Well, I'll say really quickly about the
Okay.
disclaimer. As we always say, y'all, we want to make space here for curiosity, um, for wonder, for asking questions. And we invite you to be gentle and patient with yourself and be open. We think the conversation about burnout is really important, but it can also bring up our own feelings and experiences with burnout. And so just be kind to yourself. And if you need more support, journal about it, reflect on it, talk to somebody that you really trust, lean on your guides, your therapists, people who advise you. And also let us know in the comments, like if there are things that are coming up for you around what we're saying, like let us know. We'd love to be in dialogue with you. Um, this conversation is about us growing and learning together. We're in this together. So please know this is an invitation to be kind to yourself and an invitation to be open in dialogue with us.
Thank you,
That's
Biani.
what I'll say.
Okay. So just to kind of hop in and give you all an understanding of what the order of things are, we're going to share some stats about burnout. We'll share the reasons why we can't prevent burnout. We'll share some social work trends that we're noticing on social media. And then we'll go into some tips for how to navigate and lessen the effects of burnout, know your symptoms, to be proactive and not passive in dealing with it. Um, yeah, I think that it would be cool. I have a stat I can share, Biani. I know
Please.
you've got some
Yes, please.
that are amazing that
Bring it
really
in.
like
Bring it in.
sparked our conversation to even go into this. Um, so last year this time I shared I had some work that I was specifically doing with two organizations, wellness around wellness. And so I started to pull like different burnout statistics and like what was happening just related to the pandemic. We also saw this huge rise in um, not necessarily, or in addition to like employee assistance programs in these spaces, were additional kind of wellness opportunities. And so I found that to be pretty interesting, and still kind of monitoring like how folks are talking about how specifically nonprofit organizations co-opted a lot of the wellness culture language and initiatives, but whether or not those have continued and flourished and are effective, I think we still need to kind of check into that. But one of the stats that I pulled last year that I think is really relevant now, that I wanted to just highlight, was that 62% of Americans working from home believe taking sick days for anything less severe than C19 would be looked down upon by their employer, and that one was really interesting to me, um, because, C19 is related to health, you know, and I still feel like one of the reasons that that statistic was really interesting is because if we are incorporating and kind of aligning ourselves with wellness culture language and co-opting that, um, if you are in an environment where your employer is making it appear that, the only legitimate reason for you to be taken off is because of a health related reason, there's still so much stigma then around mental health and wellness. And so that's one that, I found got a lot of conversation about within my wellness sessions that I did with folks in nonprofits. And that was really aligned with how people felt. They felt like they couldn't actually take their time off if it wasn't related to, again, um, a health reason.
I'm going to share the stats, and I also want to invite us to pay attention to our our focus around systemic, like the role that this is systemic, y'all. This is not an individual issue. Like, we're talking about workplace culture. We're talking about our culture, the way that we talk about burnout. We don't really talk about burnout. I think we talk about it and we don't talk about it. So it's just like an interesting idea. And the 62% is really high, friend. So it's really concerning, this idea that we're not giving ourselves, that we don't feel like it's okay to take care of ourselves outside of like a physical quote unquote health, right? Like, because you're right, the stigma of mental health is really alive. So I want to share some statistics that were like pre-COVID, pre-C19, that I find that a lot of social work schools tend to lean on. Like, this is the data that they use. They talk about Siebert study in 2006. So according to a study that was assessing burnout just in social workers, the results that were indicated, this happened in 2006, they indicated a current burnout rate of 39% in social workers, but the lifetime burnout rate was 75%. And this was 2006. So this is speaking to people reporting, like self-reporting that they experienced burnout, but over the period of their lives, 75% like of folks experience burnout and consistently. So this was 2006. Another pre-pandemic study noted that 80% of social workers thought that it was easy to burn out in the profession. And 70% of them um, felt like they always had too much work to do. And we know, like so many of you tuning in, that so many of us are overwhelmed and overburdened by our responsibilities as social workers. And like what Sequoia mentioned, so many of us are juggling roles outside of the bounds of the job description, right? And so all of these things are like the seeds of burnout. They all plant the seeds of burnout. And I'll share this this recent study that was done this year by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Equity. Um, they actually did a study with psychiatrists and psychotherapists, and they found the burnout rates for psychiatrists were 78%. And then for therapists, it was 50% that reported experiencing burnout. Now we know that with C19, so many mental health concerns were spiked, and the burnout rates were also high. So these are just reported, y'all. We don't know what's being reported just yet. And I think we won't know until we're on the other side of this, if that's possible, if that's good, if that's really a thing. But it's really concerning because when we're talking about this idea that we can prevent burnout, these numbers suggest that it's actually something you can't prevent, right? That in our lifetime as social workers, as helping professionals, 75% of us are going to experience burnout at consistent rate. And I know personally for me, that's true for me. And so why do we keep getting told this lie that we can prevent burnout by self-care and having good supervision and taking your PTO? Like a lot of these suggestions are really outdated, are not really connected, and are in line with the reality of what social workers and helping and care professionals are navigating on a day-to-day basis. So you cannot prevent burnout. That's not true. We can't anymore, quote unquote, we can't anymore. And we really want to destigmatize that too, because there's a lot of stigmas also that kind of get exposed when we start to like challenge that narrative. Did you want to add anything, amiga?
I think that, everything that you mentioned was absolutely spot on. And I just feel like, you know, um, and we may talk more about this, there's so many layers to this conversation. Like you mentioned a little bit about the systemic piece to it, and there's like the systems within, like, let's say the organization, you know, and then there's the systems within like the profession or, like the area that you might be working in. But then also there is this piece um, that funnels into like the wellness industry, and that there is profit to be made from making people feel like that what's happening to them is their, kind of this individual thing, and that in order to solve it, there are individual things that you can do. And to a certain extent, that's true. And also, without giving the education around that systemic, and kind of societal foundation for why burnout is so insidious and also just nonstop. It brings up things around like shame. And we'll talk more about that. But I think that these statistics really just again highlight some of the additional topics that we're going to get into. Um, and also are a place for if you are working kind of in the consulting area for you to really be thinking about like how you're supporting folks related to wellness, burnout, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, all of these terms that we hear, you know, absolutely in like the social work realm, but again, like in higher education, but then also, in like any kind of educational setting, you hear these terms. And again, it's important to look at the systemic kind of pieces around that because all of that ties together.
I appreciate you kind of bringing in all the layers to the conversation because this is a layered conversation and there's nuance to it too. And as you were sharing that, it's also making me think of like burnout for caregivers, which we heard a lot at the height of the pandemic and then during C-19. And, it's still there, right? Like there's so many of us caretaking and doing our quote unquote care work as professionals too. And so, you know, the truth of it is that for so many of us, burnout has become like a baseline or like just the experience that we're always in. And we want to sort of make space for us to understand that it's not just an individual issue. It's a collective, it's a systemic issue. And when we're offering individual solutions to a collective problem, to a systemic problem, it does make us as individuals feel like it's our fault or like we did something wrong for experiencing burnout, or like it's not okay to take some self-care time from work because I don't have a physical illness, even though I'm really hurting and I'm in pain and I'm exhausted. Like there's just so much that really makes it hard for people to really recover from burnout because of the stigma. So yeah.
Thank you, for that kind of reflection. I think that it sets up a really good transition for me to read a little bit, I just want to give like an example of what this looks like and to tie in like the systemic piece, especially around like the environments that we're in and um, how burnout is just a part of the culture of a lot of these settings. Um, and then we can, kind of get more into what we have going on. Um, so I'm going to read a little bit from the Sustaining Spirit Self-Care for Social Justice book. There's a little excerpt about being in like social justice spaces. And social justice, again, this can be applied to social service, community mental health, higher ed, education, anything that is kind of working with people, helping healthcare kind of settings. Um, so as I moved into the work world where social justice was the focus, I was excited about the values they discussed, like interdependence, which I learned in my cultural communities. However, in these activist communities, figuring out how to get things done as a group together was not in reality embraced as a legitimate way to operate. Yet, what was familiar was a state of crisis. Our group at the last minute found out a state policymaker had called a hearing the next day, and we needed to be prepared to talk. Someone in the community had been arrested, and we needed to respond with support. The fundraising we did wasn't enough to cover salaries. A state of crisis felt normal. In social justice activist communities, people reacted like they do in a crisis, scattered, trying to keep up with the moment and refusing, unable to create any time for reflection. I realized that these communities, which I initially sought out as an alternative to the ones I was raised in, were actually replicating some of the negatives of my childhood communities, negatives like crisis, but without a lot of the positives like interdependence. People in activist groups I was a part of would create a problem in order to get what they needed or make someone else responsible for dealing with the problems which made them feel overwhelmed. I found myself treating the activist communities as if my body, heart, mind, was a city bus, and each person who was part of the community had a seat on the bus. I was trying to satisfy my own needs through caring for and taking responsibility for others. However, the people inside the bus were only happy when they got to where they wanted to go, when their expectations were met. Even though I was working hard and I felt good about meeting others' needs, I eventually started making mistakes. I eventually started mistaking their needs for my own because I was centering them in my core. Instead of responding to community by centering them, I needed instead to center myself. It's as if I am a tree. I need to be the trunk and the wandering limbs, and everyone else is the leaves. I center myself as the core. As the trunk and limbs, I may be a conduit to help nourish the community, but I also have the capacity to shed them in order to preserve my life. There is always the choice to shed the leaves. This means letting other people's problems be their problems, even sometimes when it's about me. I have to build my own understanding of how I can actually help and be truthful about my motivations, why I am doing it. Courage, I realize, is to affirm the truth of a situation for myself rather than try to build a safety net for everyone based on anticipation. When I began to change my relationship with myself, recentering myself is the primary thing to which my energy went. Those people who had relied on me to give their problems energy resisted. No one was happy that I was prioritizing my own self care, honoring my own truth of the situation. However, the more I learned to trust myself and my understanding of things, the clearer I was about making choices which supported my own nourishment.
I'm struck by the tree metaphor. I really like it. Kind of, there's so much there. Recentering myself. Mm.
And I think so. Okay. One of the reasons that I really like that little excerpt is, you know, um, in a lot of, again, helping spaces, social justice, we use that term family in those settings, and it's meant to kind of tie into what Naomi was talking about related to other people's problems being our own, right? So, like, if you're working in a social service agency where the funding is not providing even the kind of basic requirements for you to be able to do your job, but then in like staff meetings, your supervisor is kind of blaming you for not being able to fully do the job that you're doing, it's like, yeah, I understand that I have a job to do, and also me not having the things that I need to actually do the job isn't my problem. And but these environments, because of certain terms, because of certain dynamics, it makes you feel as if that problem is yours though. um
Mm.
and I think that's a way to keep you invested emotionally, for reasons that are outside of the job that you're doing. I don't know I feel a lot of things about that.
Same. I mean, the thing that's coming up, yeah, and we have some friends of ours joining us live. That was a whole word. Yes, my friend, a whole word. Um, yeah, like I think there's this idea of like someone's urgency becomes our urgency, and it really builds this, like it really grows the seeds of burnout because I think about heavy caseloads. I hear that a lot. We're given these heavy caseloads. We're expected to take on more than we can handle. And and we're like supposed to solve the systemic issue. Like us as helping professionals, as care workers, like we are responsible for solving the problem, that we didn't create. It's just like, you know, or that we are tasked with the idea of tolerating certain dynamics because of the culture. Um, that is another thing that breeds burnout, right? Um, like workplace dynamics, not feeling really safe, not having a supervisory experience that really is composed of like a mentorship and a support. I always tell the folks I work with, I cannot stand the term supervision. I don't understand where somebody got this from because it's really mentorship, right? I get the term, right? Like in terms of licensing demands, but you know, if you don't have a really good experience with somebody who you report to, it doesn't breed an environment that's safe to work in. Um, if the workplace culture is where self-care is frowned upon, taking time off is frowned upon, there's no way that it feels okay for us to really take care of ourselves, right? And so, y'all, when we're talking about we can't prevent burnout, we're inviting a holistic lens here, like looking at every layer of this, because yeah, like the agency's urgency becomes our emergency. And then we are in that loop. We are in that loop. We are caught up. We are caught up in that loop. We're caught up. We're working. We're neglecting our needs. We're so busy. We're anxious. We're tired. But we have to say yes. We have to see that other. We have to add that other case. We have, there's just the burnout. It's hard to catch up. You might not even notice if you're burned out. Like that's how deep this goes. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that excerpt because the metaphor of the tree is really powerful. This idea of reminding ourselves that we're rooted, that we're grounded, and that those leaves aren't us. I love that, right? Because those leaves have fallen. They don't belong to us, y'all. Like, I love that. That's just such a great visual.
Yeah, I love this book anyway. But I just felt like that was so spot on for what we're gonna talk about today. And again, I think that one of the other things that excerpt asks us to do is, to know your growth points, but then also to understand your limitations as well. And again, in the context of like the work environment, one of the other things that I wanted to add here it's just another way to kind of look at this. So if folks are listening in and you're someone that, identifies as even a consultant, and, I mentioned before, like kind of asking how you're engaging, how you're wording, your talks on burnout and vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue to, not only staff, but maybe students, interns, volunteers, whoever. But then also, if you're a consultant and you want to get an understanding for what the temperature is around the culture in a certain environment, like you can ask questions like, what is the culture of wellness here? Are there barriers to taking time off? Can you identify any barriers, that you've heard other staff, or other team members voice about being able to take time off? Is there a culture of wellness? Um, even things around like what is the structure for requesting time off. Again, depending on where what the environment is that you might be consulting with, right? And you just want to kind of see what the answers are. You want to maybe read some body language as well, because that gives you some indicators about, again, what the culture and the landscape is, or you can just directly ask people too, is it tough for you to take time off? Do you feel supported related to mental health in this particular environment? You know, what does burnout look for you? And when you feel like that, do you get support? Do you feel like you can voice and express that? Um, yeah. And again, that's just to offer kind of another way to look at um systemic kind of perspective on burnout and how you can kind of assess even an environment that you're coming into. There's ways to look at it if you're interviewing, for certain
Mhm.
environments. If you want to get an understanding about what the culture of wellness is there, you can ask those questions in a different way, even in an interview, for instance.
Yeah, I was just about to say those are great questions that you can ask for an interview. I think you're right. And I also love the idea of thinking about or like normalizing that we can assess for wellness. Like we can assess for like how do these people talk about burnout? How do they practice recovery and repair? And what does wellness mean in this culture, right? Like are they just talking about it? How do they practice it? So I think those are really great questions. And what we're inviting, like the title suggests, is that we have to unlearn burnout and we have to unlearn this idea that it's it's like it can be prevented. I think we have to accept that it's not possible all the time, not for many. And so if that's true, how can we prepare? How can we anticipate? How can we take care of ourselves? How can we assess when we're preparing to be in new jobs or new field placements? Like we can ask these questions. And we can ask these questions in our grad programs, y'all, in our training programs too. We can ask how they talk about it. How are you going to talk about burnout? You're talking about this modality that we need to try. Well, how do you navigate burnout, right? Or how do you navigate a day full of EMDR sessions? How do you encourage providers to take care of themselves? Like, I think it'd be nice if we lived in a culture that just really normalized these conversations because people don't talk about the B word. They only talk about it when they're in it. Or they talk about it as a way to be like, you can prevent burnout. Here's how. But there's never a conversation about when you're in it. Like what happens when you are in it? How do we take care of ourselves in it, navigating it?
Yeah, definitely, and I think I'm just gonna say this point before we kind of transition into what we're seeing related to social work trends, but also that there is, a cultural piece to burnout too. If you are in a predominantly POC kind of space, and that Black women or, you know, I'm just going to stick with Black women. If you're in a space where there are predominantly Black women that are working in that space, and you have read the statistics on, how Black women are, our bodies are utilized in those spaces, and you're not doing anything to combat that, if you're not putting into place certain things where people, again, kind of the barriers even around, like, let's say barriers for PTO, right? Like if you are not embedding already practices where folks don't feel compelled to, that they can't ask for certain things, you're feeding into it then. I think that's all I want to say about that. I was there something you wanted to say, Biani?
No, I'm just nodding because I think, these are conversations that I don't hear often enough, in
Mm-hmm.
our field. And it's important for us to keep centering, like looking at this systemically, looking at the culture, looking at workplace dynamics. Like if we're really going to lessen the effects of burnout, we have to look at the practice. We have to look at how people are practicing what they preach around burnout prevention. And it's hard to practice burnout prevention because it can't be prevented. Like, you know, so yeah, we can move on to the next trend though. We can talk about
Okay.
the next thing. We could go on,
Yeah.
y'all. Let us know in the
Yeah.
meantime though. Like let us know in the comments what's resonating or if there's anything you want to add. We'd love to hear from you. But yeah, let's
Mm-hmm.
move on to our next part of this
Mm-hmm.
segment.
Mm-hmm. But I think that piece that, we kind of mentioned about questions that you can ask during an interview is really important. Um, as we kind of move into this space around what we're seeing, even in like these kind of contemporary conversations, right? Like a few episodes ago, we talked about quiet quitting in the social work context, just related to like the way that our practicums are set up. But then also, we see this related to the Great Resignation, and when Biani and I were preparing for this, we've seen like so many conversations about therapists, and I've seen predominantly like POC Black identified bodies leaving the therapy kind of sector because of burnout.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add, like, thinking about, there was a lot of conversation about the Great Resignation too, and how some stats were saying that the field of social work was remaining the same, like people seem to be staying in the field, but that's actually not true. Apparently, there's like people in certain fields of social work leaving the profession, and some of the reasons they're reporting is around not feeling like they have a voice in their workplace environments, the high rates of burnout, the mounting caseloads. So there is a trend, like we're seeing it in therapists, and we're seeing it personally, and we're also seeing it in social media. Many people are really speaking to like surrendering their license, leaving the profession altogether because of burnout and because of other issues that I think the C-19 really like put fuel, like it really like sparked, right? Like it became more of a catalyst that really opened the veil, that really revealed itself, kind of like Scorpio season's revealing itself, but like in the same way, like things are starting to come to the front. A lot of truths that have been really hidden are coming to the front, and many social workers have had it. And
Definitely.
you know, again, we think there's a correlation. There has to be a connection, because burnout, as we know, for those who've experienced it, not having a voice, not feeling like what you're doing really is helping or matters. Burnout can really make you sick too. The exhaustion. I mean, after a while, it is really hard to sustain. Um, and we think it's really important. It was a concern before the pandemic, and it's becoming a bigger concern now, the rates of burnout.
Yeah, I just wanted to ground like what you brought in just related to the panini and the realizations that people were kind of having were related to really understanding the uh the ways that they weren't supported in their work environments, during like the panini really highlighted, oh, you just really want me to be out here like rubbing sticks together, and trying to do this
Right.
job as opposed to, you know, providing additional support. Like I think folks already had some aspect of understanding, but there was this kind of breakdown in the cognitive dissonance around that. It's like, oh, okay, you just expect me to, again, almost move mountains, with
Hmm.
little to nothing, or continue to operate as if the panini isn't happening, like
Yes.
regular business. um and I think that compiled with the emotional impacts of being in a panini, it was just, there was too much kind of there.
Yes.
So just wanted to highlight a little bit around that.
And let
Was
us know
there
in the comments if y'all are seeing things, like if you are seeing a trend. I mean, we're hearing it, we're seeing it, but if you're also noticing it in social work or in other like helping healing professions, care professionals, because it is true. It's true. Like many people are feeling taken advantage of, and it's only right
Mhm, mhm.
to kind of like the tree metaphor, like come back, right? Recenter and reevaluate.
Definitely, definitely. Should we hop into tips? Is this a good place to kind
Yeah.
of talk about tips, or how we feeling?
Yeah, I think we're ready for tips. And if
Okay.
folks are, have things they want to share, they're welcome to share, but we'll move on to tips. Um, I'm happy to do that. So it's interesting thinking about tips, right? But I think again, what we want to say is that if we hold the truth that we can't prevent burnout, then it gives us space for us to um, I don't know how to like how to word it, but if we can acknowledge the truth that we can't prevent burnout, we can be in a space of honoring that we may experience it. So how do we take care of ourselves? Or we will experience it. So how do we take care of ourselves? How can we anticipate, certain stressors happening? Like, how do we really offer ourselves grace and extend ourselves kindness and gentleness? And a lot of what we're inviting is to really be proactive. Um, and what I mean is be proactive about taking care of yourself, developing your supports, um, being intentional about how you care for yourself is like at the top. I'll share an example for me. Like, I think that one of the ways, like one of the important things is to notice. I have to know what my symptoms are with burnout. When I'm tired, when I start to feel apathetic, when I start to feel confused, like those things really remind me, oh, maybe, oh, I'm starting to really be on that roller coaster of burnout. How can I take care of myself? I might need to really rest more. I might have to like call out or cancel some sessions, or I might have to like ask for help in these moments. Um, so like really, really identifying what your signs are. What are your experiences with burnout? Like I notice it when I'm irritable. Did I sleep well last night? What did I eat today? Did I see the sun? Like sometimes it's that really kind of basic needs, those foundational needs. When I start to feel deprived from that and I'm feeling really tired, those are my signs. So what are yours? Let us know in the comments. What are yours? And I'm happy. I would love to hear from Sequoia too. Like, what are your tips? And we can go back and forth if you like, but those are the ones that come to me right now.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge the comments that did come up, from your invitation, you know, and just tie those into the tips. And so we got a comment from Dr. Truesdale that says the last 2 years really did show us the emperor has no clothes and folks are no longer buying into the lies. Higher ed, many of us left because there was no respect.
Mm,
You know, I think that that ties into even the tips, that there was a place of understanding, like, okay, I see what this dynamic is, and then making that decision, tying that back into like the tree and the leaves kind of metaphor. Like, let me just let these leaves just fall on off. Let me just let them fall on off. And I'll figure out, I'll be able to, apply my skills in another setting. And then Day Lotus says tips sound wonderful. Yeah,
Thanks,
I
Day.
feel like that just resonates and ties into, what we've been kind of sharing about. I think if you were within certain identities, again, PLC, BIPOC, femme identified, so on and so forth, I think that message got even louder. And really centering and prioritizing yourself was super important. One of the things that ties into what Dr. Truesdale said, which aligns with my which aligns with my tips, is a wellness plan, you know,
Mm,
and wellness plans to me are really important because they, again, help recenter, reprioritize ourselves. And sometimes what's a part of a wellness plan is indicators of when to let go, you know, when to resign, when to walk away, when to draw a boundary, like whatever that means for you. Again, especially if you are someone who identifies within certain identities that are more prone to exploitation, in those kind of settings. The other thing that I want to add too that I see with my clients a lot of the times, especially with my Black women identified folks, is that it's so important to have an identity outside of work. It's so important to cultivate yourself, your worth, your value outside of work. It's so important to understand that, you know, productivity, output, outcomes are not the only ways that you are valuable. And I think a lot of that sometimes too feeds into burnout, right? Because it aligns, and that kind of goes back to what I was talking about related to if you're in an environment that has specifically like more Black women identified folks in there and you aren't putting things into place, that combat what you already know this particular identity brings into certain work environments. So, encouraging folks to have identities outside of these spaces, is really important. Asking about those things, related to that. Again, encouraging that. Because we know that that's just a part of kind of how things are set up for us. And then the last thing I'll say is political education. So, ensuring that you are listening to podcasts like this and others that ground in, alternative views about the settings that you're in, right? Because um, it can be really ungrounding and also lonely when you have these feelings of this doesn't feel right. I don't really know like what's happening. Even in with this piece, like with understanding and having the language about what your feeling is burnout, it's important to educate yourself outside of kind of what you're hearing from these spaces that can be exploitative, because a lot of the time the messaging is to keep you in a mindset that everything is okay or that, it's your fault, stigma, kind of shame around certain things. You feel like you can't speak up and say things. Um, but if you educate yourself so that you can have the awareness to be able to identify some of these things a little bit sooner, and then again, ties back into that wellness plan piece, it might just be helpful. To limit some of the impact.
Yeah, I love all of these, and it's what's coming up for me is around boundaries. Like we're talking about boundaries too, and I'm also thinking about like really grounding ourselves in our spiritual practices. If that's it's, and I think political education is a part of our spiritual practice, right? Like really
Definitely.
learning and knowing how we can support ourselves, like really gaining the education so that we can like organize and act and advocate. I I tend to like move away from being like, well, you gotta, help change the system at your work. That's one way. That's one way that you can do it, but it's also about education and really taking care of ourselves and really leaning on our community to really be there for us. Rest, like giving ourselves permission to rest, um, acknowledging when we feel guilt and shame that we're tired. That's often a sign that we're burned out when we start feeling like, oh, I can't cancel, I can't call out today because I promised this client. And this idea that we often like avoid our feelings or avoid what we're feeling in our bodies or sensing, like when rest is really screaming for us. But yeah, like also leading on our spiritual practices. And I also want to acknowledge that, maybe for those who are tuning in, you might be really new to the field and you just started this job and you're starting to notice burnout. Who can you trust at the job, to really support you? Maybe there is somebody there. It doesn't have to be your supervisor. Maybe it's another colleague. How can you all support each other? And feel free to reach out to us if you want some support around like tips. Maybe or like check the comments out. Like we can be here for each other um, around like these like sort of dilemmas because burnout is inevitable, and how we navigate it is going to vary by person and vary by the culture at your job, by the community you're a part of, by the dynamics at your work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you might have to try some things. You might have to try some tips. You might have to try things and see what sticks for you. Um, I know we're moving to main takeaways. I feel like I've gone there already, but
Okay.
yeah, that's what's coming up. But yeah, that idea that like just take listen to what we're sharing, but there might be some tips that are coming up for you. So check out our previous episode around intuition and like this practice of burnout recovery. We have to rest so that we can reconnect to our kind of like our inner wisdom, right? Like really paying attention to ourselves, like, oh, this is what I need, or this is what I'm noticing. Oh, that wasn't really appropriate for me. Oh, this is where I need to grow. Like this is my growth edge right now around political education, or I said yes to this thing when I really wanted to say no. Like there's a lot that we have space to learn. Practice your boundary scripts. Add that to your wellness plan too. Like write down the kind of boundaries you want to set when somebody asks you to cross them. You know, all those
Definitely.
things are helpful.
Definitely. I love those takeaways. I think for me, one of my main takeaways just kind of comes from how I structure, again, like my wellness offerings in nonprofits, especially around like burnout, compassion, fatigue, vicarious trauma, etc. Um, is that it's important for you to have the language to be able to express and identify like what you're feeling. And then the second thing, that I'll say as a main takeaway too is to give yourself grace when you're able to identify that you're feeling burnout, that you're experiencing the symptoms that to be aligned with how your body feels when you're burnt out. We, even though folks act like we're not still kind of in the panini, we are, that is still a very relevant and real thing. Caregiving on top of, it's a little bananas in these work environments right now, so just having grace around the reality of what you're holding, what you're navigating, regardless of what kind of space you're in. Even if you work for yourself, navigating and handling your clients, it's a lot right now. Folks are bringing a lot of things to the table, and not, I'll say it like this, just like I read from that excerpt, a lot of the spaces are operating from a crisis kind of mindset related to things, very scattered. And so having grace with yourself, even in the midst of that, and acknowledging, like, oh, this is from a crisis kind of mindset. Okay, I understand, right? And it kind of helps you to just remove either the alignment or that pulling in that happens, with that scattering. Um,
I do
so
want to
those are my
say, and
takeaways.
oh, I love your takeaways and what's resonating. And I wonder if folks could share in the comments. Like we've talked about urgency. We talked about it in season 1, and we're bringing it back to like today. And I think we've all kind of mentioned it in different ways. Urgency is a theme, y'all. Like urgency being tied to crisis and what happens when we are reacting to crisis and what that means for us, how we take care of ourselves, and really like stress, burnout, all those things. So I just want to note, I'm just noticing a theme that feels important. And yeah, like us taking care of ourselves and really, really learning how to not like feel burdened by an agency's crisis. And
That
like the
sounds good.
book, like, yeah, the tree. Just remember the tree. You are the tree. How can you ground yourself? You are the root.
Okay,
All righty.
cool. So thank you all for being with us today. Let's keep this conversation going. Please share your thoughts and or questions in the comment section. It's definitely always open. Um, let's see. We have kind of a taking us out comment. I agree. The chaos crisis keeps us in this space thinking we have to keep doing more to fix whatever is going on, so we disconnect from our own humanity.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you.
Mhm,
Thank you for
mhm.
your yes. Whew.
Thank you. And then let's see. Oh, geez, what am I doing? Okay. Sorry, you all. So share your thoughts, questions, or comments in the comments section. Let us know of your experiences with burnout. Tell us what you will be unlearning about burnout after today or moving forward. We love to hear from you. So I am very excited about our upcoming episode, which is going to be on November 21st. It's going to be our 12th episode, and it's going to be about channeling our queer ancestors. So I'm really excited to talk about as we move into this holiday season. If you are a queer identified person who does or doesn't have a connection with family, how you connect with queer ancestors. Biani and I are going to share what our process is related to connecting with queer ancestors. So I know Biani has a practice, related to Audre Lorde. We both feel a connection to, Bill Hooks. And so what does that look like, related to James Baldwin, Joseph Beam, like whoever your queer ancestors are. And if you want tips on how to cultivate a practice, this is an amazing time of year, especially for, our queer folks to really kind of lean into that. So we're really excited about that for November 21st.
Yeah, so join us live for that, y'all. We'd love to be in conversation with you. And shout out to those who joined us live today. Thank you so much for being here with us, y'all. We appreciate your comments, your feedback. We're learning, we're growing, we're learning with you all. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thanks again for being in community with us and supporting a heart-centered podcast by two queer Black femme healers and spiritual social workers who explore the intersection of magic, spirituality, identity, and ancestral connections through the lens of tarot, divination, mysticism, mental health, and everything in between. We would love to stay connected with you all to build this spiritual and healing community together. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Like and subscribe, Reclaiming Soul Work Podcast. Once you subscribe, you can set a reminder for notifications when we release a new episode. You can also sign up at the landing page on our website to be notified when we have a new episode or any other of our future offerings. Our free newsletter goes out every first quarter moon, so you don't want to miss out on that. Do sign up for our newsletter. And again, thank you for being here with us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.